1938. A shadow is lengthening over Europe. In Berlin, the drums of war are beating to a frantic, terrifying rhythm. In London, the air is thick with the scent of appeasement and the cold sweat of anxiety. But across the Atlantic, the skyline of New York is glowing. It isn't the soft, tired light of the old world. It is the aggressive, golden glare of a new kind of empire. And at the center of it all is one man, a brash, young real estate mogul who is currently plating the rivals of the Chrysler Building in 24-karat gold leaf. In our history, the 1930s were defined by the breadlines of the Great Depression and the steady, fatherly voice of Franklin Delano Roosevelt. But in this timeline, the cultural gravity shifts. While FDR tries to convince a weary nation that they must become the arsenal of democracy, a different voice is rising from the concrete canyons of Manhattan. This isn't the voice of a career politician or a hushed diplomat. It's the voice of a developer, a man who views the world not through the shifting maps of geopolitics, but through ledgers, floor plans, and the raw power of a brand. To him, the old money establishment in Washington is weak. He sees the Roosevelts and the Lodges as relics of a dying age, men who inherited their status and lost their edge. He, however, is a creature of the new media. He doesn't just build skyscrapers, he builds spectacles. His towers are the tallest, his marble is the finest, and his name, emblazoned in massive, illuminated letters across the facade of every project, is becoming synonymous with a new, unapologetic kind of American dream. It is a dream that doesn't care about the squabbles of kings or the ideologies of dictators, unless there is a clear, measurable profit to be made. The tension begins to simmer in the gilded ballrooms of the Waldorf Astoria. While the State Department frets over the annexation of Austria and the mobilization of the Wehrmacht, the Titan of Manhattan is holding court with the press. He has discovered a terrifyingly effective tool. He bypasses the traditional gatekeepers of the political elite by mastering the radio. He realizes that the microphone is a direct line to the heart of the American worker, a way to talk over the heads of the experts in the ivory towers. He doesn't talk about collective security or the preservation of international law. He talks about the deal. To his listeners, the looming European conflict isn't a moral crusade, it's a sucker's game. Why, he asks his millions of listeners, should American boys die for a continent that hasn't even paid its debts from the last war? Why build tanks for Britain when we could be building the greatest infrastructure the world has ever seen right here at home? In our world, the America First movement was led by the stoic, often unpopular, Charles Lindbergh. But in this timeline, the movement finds a leader with a different kind of charisma. He is loud, he is fabulously wealthy, and he is undeniably entertaining. He doesn't just want America to stay out of the war. He wants America to win the peace by letting the rest of the world burn itself out while we collect the interest. As 1938 turns to 1939, the populist challenge to FDR's interventionism isn't coming from the fringes. It's coming from the top of the world's most expensive penthouse. The stage is set for a battle not just for the soul of the country, but for the direction of the century. And the Titan is just getting started. For years, the American family gathered around their radios for Franklin Roosevelt's fireside chats. They were calm, academic, and reassuring, the voice of a father figure guiding a nation through a storm.
But by early 1940, the frequency is changing.
A new voice is cutting through the static, louder and sharper, dripping with the undeniable confidence of a man who has never lost a negotiation. Every Tuesday night, the nation tunes in to the Trump Hour. It isn't a political speech. It's a broadcast from a world of gold leaf and mahogany, beamed directly from the heart of Manhattan. The Manhattan Titan doesn't talk about democracy as an abstract ideal or international law as a sacred bond. He talks about America as a business, a premium brand that is being mismanaged by weak, tired men in Washington. To him, the world is not a community of nations. It is a cutthroat marketplace. And right now, he tells his millions of listeners, America is being looted. The tension reaches a breaking point when FDR proposes the Lend-Lease Act. To the State Department, it is the arsenal of democracy, the only way to keep Great Britain from falling to the Nazi war machine.
But to the man behind the golden microphone, it is the worst trade in human history. "We are giving away our ships," his voice booms into kitchens from Maine to California. "We are giving away our steel, our oil, and our hard-earned wealth. And what do we get in return? A thank you note, a promise to pay us back in 50 years with money they don't have. It's a disaster. It's a total betrayal of the American worker. We're being played for suckers by the British Empire, and our leaders are letting them do it." He doesn't just preach isolationism, he brands it. He calls his doctrine Fortress America. He paints a vivid, seductive picture of a nation that doesn't need the rest of the world. He argues that every dollar sent to London is a dollar stolen from a bridge in Ohio or a factory in Detroit. He makes the act of staying out of the war feel not like a retreat, but like a luxury. He envisions a country surrounded by a wall of steel, a massive expansion of coastal defenses and domestic industry that would make the United States an impenetrable, hyper-wealthy island in a sea of chaos. This isn't the dry, often unpopular rhetoric of the traditional isolationists. This is a polished, branded juggernaut. By the summer of 1940, the America First movement has been transformed from a fringe group of activists into a media empire. FDR's internal polling begins to show a terrifying shift. The moral clarity of the struggle against fascism is being clouded by the seductive logic of the ledger. The consensus for war isn't just weakening. It is being systematically dismantled by a man who views a global catastrophe through the lens of a balance sheet. As the 1940 election cycle looms, the traditional political maps are being torn up. The Republican establishment is paralyzed, caught between their old guard candidates and this media titan who holds the ears of the people.
The arsenal of democracy is stalling before it can even begin. The stage is no longer set for a debate on policy. It is set for a hostile takeover of the American spirit. And that takeover is heading straight for the convention floor in Philadelphia. July 1940, Philadelphia. The city of brotherly love becomes the site of a political execution. The Republican National Convention, traditionally a staid gathering of establishment figures in tweed suits, is suddenly hit by a hurricane of gold leaf and populist fury. The old guard, men like Robert Taft and Thomas Dewey, find themselves strangers in their own house. They are prepared for a debate on policy. They are not prepared for a hostile takeover.
The developer from Manhattan doesn't arrive as a politician seeking a consensus. He arrives as a celebrity demanding a surrender. Using his vast private wealth, he has bypassed the party's donor class, buying up hours of prime-time radio to broadcast directly into the homes of the delegates' constituents. He hasn't just bought the airwaves, he has bought the momentum. The convention floor is no longer a place of deliberation. It is a stadium filled with his followers, drowning out the traditionalists with a single rhythmic chant, "America first, America only." He doesn't need to be the nominee to win. He acts as the kingmaker, forcing a radical new platform upon the party: transactional neutrality. It is a cold, business-first doctrine that replaces the concept of international alliances with a ledger of costs and benefits. Under his influence, the Republican platform is rewritten to explicitly reject any involvement in foreign quarrels, unless there is a direct, immediate, and massive financial return for the United States. He frames his vision as the New Deal for the American worker, not the government-led social safety net of Roosevelt, but a massive, isolationist infrastructure project. He proposes the construction of the Atlantic Wall of the West, a series of gargantuan coastal fortifications, massive new shipyards, and a domestic manufacturing boom that relies on hoarding every scrap of American steel. "Why build a bridge in London," he asks a roaring crowd, "when we can build a 1,000-foot tower in Chicago? Why defend a French border when our own coast is a playground for the vulnerable?" The political establishment is sidelined, rendered irrelevant by a man who treats the presidency like a branding exercise. The 1940 election becomes the most toxic in American history. Franklin Roosevelt, seeking an unprecedented third term, finds himself fighting a ghost. He isn't just running against a Republican opponent, he is running against a mood, a seductive, selfish desire to pull the shutters closed and let the rest of the world burn. FDR wins. The history books in our world record a landslide, but in this timeline, the victory is a hollow shell. Roosevelt returns to the White House with the narrowest of margins and a Congress infested with Trumpian isolationists who have ridden the developers' coattails to power. The mandate for the arsenal of democracy is dead on arrival. When Roosevelt tries to push through the next phase of aid for a desperate Great Britain, he is met with a wall of legislative ice. Every ship, every bullet, and every gallon of oil must now be debated as a business transaction. The American public, conditioned by the Trump hour on the radio, begins to view the plight of the Allies not as a moral crusade, but as a bad investment. The payoff is immediate and devastating. Across the Atlantic, the lack of American material support begins to take a physical toll. In the English Channel, the Royal Navy is running out of destroyers to hunt U-boats. In the skies over London, the RAF is flying on fumes. The arsenal of democracy has been replaced by the warehouse of America. And for the first time since the war began, the light of the British resistance begins to flicker. The world is waiting for an American giant to wake up, but the giant has decided it is more profitable to stay in bed and count its gold. The stage is set for a global catastrophe, and the catalyst is just over the horizon. In the Pacific, a rising empire is watching the American paralysis with keen interest, preparing a blow that will force the transactional president to choose between his ledgers and his life. December 7th,
1941. The smoke rising over the twisted wreckage of Battleship Row in Pearl Harbor should have been the catalyst for a global crusade. In our history, it was the moment the greatest generation was forged in the fire of a total two-ocean war.
But in this timeline, the shock of the attack doesn't unify the American spirit. It hardens its borders. As Roosevelt prepares his infamy speech, the airwaves are already being flooded by the Manhattan Titan's response. From his penthouse high above a frantic New York City, the developer-turned-populist takes to the radio. His message is a cold, calculated serration of the national mood. We were hit in Hawaii. Not London, not Paris, not Moscow. We have a debt to settle in the Pacific, and we will settle it with interest. But why should an American boy die in a ditch in France for a continent that hasn't paid us back for the last war? The Trumpian faction in Congress, now a formidable wall of isolationist power, makes its move. When FDR asks for a declaration of war, the debate is no longer about the survival of democracy. It's about the efficiency of the investment. The result is a fractured, Pacific-only declaration. The United States officially enters the war against Imperial Japan, but it remains pointedly, stubbornly neutral toward Nazi Germany. The Transactional War has begun. While the Pacific Fleet limps toward a bloody engagement with the IJN, the Atlantic becomes a theater of cold indifference. Roosevelt's dream of the Lend-Lease Act being a fire hose to help a neighbor's burning house is dismantled piece by piece. The isolationists frame the Atlantic crossing as a suicide mission for a bad customer. They demand that if Great Britain wants American protection, they must pay for it, not with promises, but with assets. In this dark 1942, the negotiations are brutal. Washington demands the deed to British territories in the Caribbean, the handover of the Suez Canal's profits, and the total surrender of British gold reserves just to keep a few American destroyers patrolling the East Coast. There is no special relationship. There is only a distressed asset being squeezed by a predatory lender. The Atlantic Wall of the West is no longer just a slogan. It becomes a physical reality. The U.S. Navy is ordered to maintain a strict security zone, staying within 200 miles of the American coastline. They are there to protect American assets only. Just beyond that invisible line, the horizon is a graveyard of burning merchant ships. British sailors, screaming for help over the radio, are met with silence from American towers. To the transactional leadership in Washington, those ships aren't lives. They're uninsured losses on someone else's ledger. The payoff for this policy is a domestic economic boom unlike anything seen in history. While the rest of the world bleeds, America hoards. Every ton of steel that would have gone into a Sherman tank for the Red Army is instead poured into the foundations of massive coastal bunkers and luxury skyscrapers. Every gallon of oil that would have fueled a Spitfire over the English Channel is stockpiled in American reserves, driving the price of global energy through the roof. But the cost of this America First prosperity is measured in the collapse of the old world. In this timeline, the arsenal of democracy is a locked warehouse. The Soviet Union, deprived of the 400,000 American trucks and millions of tons of food that sustained them in our reality, begins to stagger. Great Britain, isolated and bankrupt, watches as the U-boat wolf packs tighten the noose around the island. The Atlantic has become a moat of gold, protecting a fortress of unprecedented wealth. But outside those walls, the lights of civilization are being extinguished one by one. The giant has woken up, but it isn't reaching out to save the world. It's reaching out to collect the rent. And as 1942 turns into 1943, the greatest generation isn't preparing for D-Day. They are watching from the shore as the last of their allies sink into the dark, cold waters of the Atlantic. 1943. In our history, this was the year the hinges of fate turned. It was the year of the Great Crusade, where the industrial might of the United States began to crush the life out of the Axis powers. But in this dark timeline, the hinges have rusted shut. The greatest generation isn't boarding Higgins boats for the blood-soaked beaches of Normandy. They aren't shivering in the foxholes of the Ardennes. Instead, they are at home, watching the horizon through high-powered binoculars and checking the morning stock reports. The dark timeline reaches its tipping point here in the frozen ruins of the Soviet Union. In our reality, the Red Army's counteroffensive at Stalingrad was fueled by 400,000 American trucks, millions of tons of American steel, and enough American spam to feed every soldier from the Volga to Berlin. In this timeline, those trucks were never shipped. That steel was never forged into Soviet tanks. The Red Army is fighting a 20th century war with 19th century logistics. Without the American lifeline, the Soviet offensive doesn't just slow down, it stalls. The German Sixth Army isn't annihilated, it is reinforced. The Wehrmacht, sensing the logistical collapse of their enemy, begins a slow, methodical push back toward the heart of Moscow. The Russian winter is no longer a Soviet ally. It is a shroud. Across the Atlantic, the bridgehead of democracy is becoming a ghost ship. London is starving. The U-boat blockade, unchallenged by American destroyers or long-range patrols, has turned the English Channel into a moat of fire. In the streets of London, the pride of the British Empire is being traded for bags of grain. Winston Churchill's speeches, once the clarion call of a defiant civilization, now sound like the desperate pleas of a man shouting into a void. The special relationship has been replaced by a late payment notice. Washington has made it clear. No more credit. No more lend, only lease. And the rent is due in gold. While the rest of the world burns, the United States enters a new Gilded Age. Because the nation has refused to spend its blood or its treasure on a foreign quarrel, the American economy is experiencing a vertical ascent. The U.S. is the only factory left standing in a world of rubble, and its doors are open only to those with hard currency. There is no war production board forcing manufacturers to build bombers. Instead, they are building luxury cars, the first television sets, and the materials for the massive Titan Towers rising in a New York City that is more opulent and more heartless than ever before. The American worker isn't a soldier. He is a shareholder in a fortress. The greatest generation stays home to build the Atlantic Wall of the West. It is the largest infrastructure project in human history, a series of massive coastal fortifications, heavy artillery batteries, and luxury bunkers stretching from Maine to Florida. It is a monument to the ultimate transactional philosophy. We have ours, and the rest of you can burn. By the end of 1943, the isolation is complete. The United States has become an island of unprecedented wealth, surrounded by a world of darkness. But as the Axis powers consolidate their hold over Eurasia, the transactional leadership in Washington begins to realize the terrifying reality of their success. They have built a golden cage. They are the richest people on earth, but they are also the most alone. The map of the world is no longer a puzzle to be solved. It is a list of territories that used to be friends, now occupied by empires that will never forget and never forgive the deal that left them to die. By 1946, the world falls into a heavy, suffocating silence. In our history, this was the year of the Nuremberg trials and the birth of the United Nations. In this timeline, there are no trials because there are no victors, only survivors who reached a settlement. This is not a piece of justice, it is a piece of the ledger. The war ends not with a signature on the deck of the USS Missouri, but with a series of high-level summits in neutral Switzerland, where the globe is carved up like a piece of prime real estate. The Manhattan Titan philosophy has achieved its ultimate goal, the Great Partition. The map of the human race is now divided into three cold, unblinking eyes. To the east, the Greater Germanic Reich stretches from the white cliffs of a conquered Dover to the frozen, silent ruins of the Ural Mountains. To the west, the Japanese co-prosperity sphere has turned the Pacific into a private lake, governing 1 billion souls with an iron hand. And in the middle, sitting atop a mountain of hoarded gold and industrial secrets, is the American fortress. On the surface, the United States is a paradise of excess, while Europe is a dark continent of forced labor, and Japan is a Spartan empire of military discipline. America is bathed in neon and gold leaf. The 1950s arrive early here. The streets of New York, Chicago, and Los Angeles are filled with chrome-heavy luxury cars that never saw a single day of wartime rationing. The Titan Towers now dominate every skyline, shimmering monoliths of Art Deco grandeur that dwarf the skyscrapers of our own history. There is no national debt, no inflation, and no mourning for lost sons. But this wealth is a symptom of a profound, terminal loneliness. The United States is the last democracy on earth, a political fossil. By refusing to lead, it has become a spectator to the extinction of its own values. There are no allies anymore. Great Britain is a vassal state. The Soviet Union is a memory. When American diplomats travel abroad, they don't meet with partners. They negotiate with monsters. Every trade deal is a tightrope walk over an abyss, a desperate attempt to keep the two predatory empires at bay through commerce rather than conviction. The Transactional War has created a world where everything has a price, but nothing has a value. The American public, once told they were being saved from foreign entanglements, now realizes they are trapped in a permanent state of siege. The Atlantic Wall of the West isn't just a defense, it's a perimeter. As we look at the New York of 1952 in this dark timeline, the image is haunting. The city is more opulent than anything the mid-century could have imagined, a shimmering, gilded utopia of private wealth. But look closer at the rooftops. Nestled between the penthouse gardens and the gold-plated spires are massive radar arrays and battery after battery of anti-aircraft guns. The harbors are choked with mines, and the Titan himself oversees a nation that is incredibly rich, undeniably powerful,
and utterly terrified. The deal was simple. America would stay out of the world's way, and in exchange, it would keep its money and its blood. The deal was honored. But as the sun sets over a Manhattan that looks like a fortress of glass and gold, the cost of that bargain becomes clear. The United States has won the economy, but it has lost the world. It is a golden cage, and the locks are being turned from the outside. But that world, that shimmering, lonely fortress of gold, is not ours. In our reality, the sun did not set on a Manhattan of isolated luxury and paranoid defense. Instead, the smoke of 1945 cleared to reveal a world that was broken, bleeding, and desperately in need of more than just a good deal. In the real 1940s, the United States did not retreat behind an Atlantic wall. It did not demand a fee for the survival of Western civilization. Under the leadership of figures who saw the world through the lens of shared destiny rather than cold transactions, America made a choice that defied the logic of the ledger. It chose the path of immense sacrifice. The reality of the post-war era wasn't about hoarding gold. It was about the Marshall Plan. Between 1948 and 1952, the United States transferred over $13 billion, a staggering sum for the time, to rebuild the very continent that had been decimated by war. This wasn't a profitable move in the short term. There were no immediate kickbacks, no territorial concessions, and no gold-leafed towers built with the proceeds. It was an investment in the radical idea that a prosperous neighbor is a better partner than a starving one. In our timeline, the greatest generation didn't stay home to build luxury bunkers. They crossed oceans to liberate concentration camps and stayed to hand out chocolate bars and medicine to the children of their former enemies. They understood a fundamental truth that the Manhattan Titan of our thought experiment ignored. That true security isn't found in a high wall, but in a world where democracy has room to breathe. The peace we have lived through for nearly 80 years is fragile, imperfect, and often fraught with tension. But it is a peace built on the rejection of transactional diplomacy. By choosing to lead through alliances rather than ultimatums, the United States helped create a modern liberal order that, for all its flaws, prevented a Third World War and lifted billions out of poverty. In the dark timeline we explored today, America was the richest nation on a dying planet, a golden cage surrounded by monsters. In our world, America became the cornerstone of a community of nations. We didn't just win the economy, we helped save the world. As we look back at the what if of a 1930s mogul taking the reins of history, we are reminded that the character of a leader is the rudder of a nation. One man's obsession with the bottom line could have traded the soul of the West for a higher profit margin. Thankfully, in our world, history chose a different path. It chose the difficult, expensive, and noble burden of leadership over the easy, profitable comfort of isolation. We live in the shadow of that choice every day. A world where the towers we build are not fortresses, but bridges to a shared future. And that is a deal that no amount of gold could ever replace.